Alright, so after 3 months, we finally got Invincible Season 2, Episode 5, and the plot for it is pretty much this. The Grayson household is upended when Mark returns to Earth with surprising new responsibilities, and the Guardians of the Globe face dangers both at home and away. Alright, let's get into the things that happened in this episode, and this episode pretty much takes place instantly after Episode 4. We see all the dead bodies, we see how Mark is still recovering from that whooping that he took. But then we also get a montage of Mark actually helping out the insects, and it probably takes place in like a couple of days or weeks. But then he is eventually forced to go back to Earth, but unfortunately Andressa actually forces Mark to bring the kid with him, which is genetically his brother obviously. But once Andressa pretty much tells Mark that she's not old enough to be taking care of him because she ages quickly, and that it wouldn't be fair to the child, while Mark is explaining to one of the Thraxans on why he should probably stay on Earth because the heroes should be doing well, we actually get a cut of this villain facing pretty much every superhero that we've either seen or haven't seen in the series so far, and it seems like they're having a pretty tough time with him. But once Mark gets back to Earth, we pretty much see Debbie's reaction to it, and she's not taking it that well, because the guy was gone for like 2 months and didn't tell really anyone, and even Cecil was concerned at times because he didn't order Mark to go to this unknown planet. But of course Mark brought this little brother with him, and he has to show her this baby that obviously is from Nolan, and we all know how Debbie feels about Nolan right now. And she makes a pretty valid point that pretty much Omni-Man leaves his mess for everyone else to pick up, but she does volunteer to actually take care of the child with Mark, because the other options was Mark dropping out of college, which she did not want at all. We also get Donald in this episode learning more about himself, and he actually learns the whole truth here. But before that happens, he actually yells at everyone to get out of the room, which if you watch the show, Donald isn't really that kind of guy. And that even surprised Cecil. But pretty much what happened to him in season 1 when, Omni-Man basically killed the guy, he actually dodged the explosions through Omni-Man's body. But he wasn't in the best shape after that explosion because the only thing left is his brain, which was pretty much all they needed to actually get him to become basically this drone robot thing. But one thing that I found funny was Cecil trying to tell him not to make a big deal out of this, because if any normal person found out about this, I think they'd probably quit their job. So Cecil's a lot better than most of us. Mark also ends up going back to his college or university, and he ends up finding out that he's on academic probation, which Will actually ends up telling him obviously, and how he basically had to cover for him in terms of school for like 2 months. And once he realizes that he has to go talk to his teachers, he actually ends up running into Cecil, who just magically appears, and how he's been basically gone for 2 months and defied Cecil's orders. But we also find out that Cecil actually called people to bring Mark's brother to him. But obviously we all know what would happen if Cecil got his hands on that kid, and he would pretty much just make him a science experiment. Obviously he would take care of that child, but at the same time we all know the real intentions with this character, and Mark was not going for it. So pretty much the only way to sway Cecil was pretty much to just work with him and commit to anything that he says, which is what Mark does. But I'm definitely starting to feel more tension throughout the whole show, but especially between those two characters, especially once the Viltrumites start getting more involved. And it's not really just that, but it just feels like Mark and Cecil are going to have a lot of big headbutting moments throughout the rest of the season. And I know Mark has to listen to Cecil as of right now, but I don't know how long that's really going to last. We get back to the Guardians of the Globe, and we pretty much learn about Shapesmith and how he got onto Earth. And he actually killed one of the astronauts last season so that he could get onto the ship. But the problem with that is that these little, I don't know exactly what they're called, but they pretty much take over that dead astronaut's body and take over the whole ship that he's on, which leads to hundreds of millions of these things being on ship. And there's actually other Martians on the ship that are actually trying to hide from it, all because he wanted to get on Earth and kill the guy. But I thought the way they did that was actually pretty funny. Obviously not the big situation that happened, but the way that he explained it was pretty funny to me. But after that happens, Rex has to go to Eve's house to convince her to come on this mission because they need her superhero abilities. And if you remember last season, Eve actually cost a lot of people their lives, or endangered their lives, I'd say. And that's definitely still messing with her in this episode. But Rex, out of everyone in the show, actually basically sweet talks her into doing this because she does believe in her and thinks she'll bounce back better than ever because that's all she's ever done. Because I thought that was actually a pretty sweet moment because those two characters are not on the best terms right now. But this episode pretty much showed me that Mark's impact when he leaves is very massive. Obviously at the beginning of the episode we see the Guardians of the Globe struggling to beat that villain, and if Invincible was there, I'm not saying that they would easily beat that villain, but he would definitely make it a lot easier. We see how Debbie's impacted by Mark leaving, and we also see how Amber's dealing with it because Amber's already going through stuff, and then also has to cover for him to explain why he's always gone, and how her friends basically don't believe that she has a boyfriend because this guy's always gone, and even how the best friend is dealing with it. And that's something that's not only going to be lasting for the next 3 episodes, but however many seasons Invincible continues to have. But then everyone ends up going to space except Rex and the twins and fake Ant-Man. And let's just say that their plan doesn't really go well. Russ Livingston is just too much for them. And even before they get onto the ship, they very quickly, with no hesitation, blow up the ship, and it took Eve's big bubble to save them. But once they get on the ship, it turns out the Martians obviously were hiding from them, like I said, but they also said because one of the heroes, I don't know their name, basically crushes this brain crawling thing, which instantly fires off the notion that one of them just died and they know the location of it, which leads to Russ Livingston pretty much breaking through the door and causing massive chaos. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but let's just say I did not like the way it ended. And basically, if you didn't watch the episode, we don't get an ending really. We don't know what's going to happen here, but they're not in the best situation. We go back to Earth with Rex and the twins and fake Ant-Man, and pretty much Cecil tells them, we don't get to see it, but Cecil tells them that they have to go fight King Lizard. And that did not go well at all. I was thinking that they were going to pull it out and eventually get the win, obviously, because Invincible, so far, we haven't had any of the heroes really die. Aside from the first episode of season 1. Actually, never mind. There's been a lot of hero deaths in the show. But we actually end up getting 2 deaths. One was the twins, obviously, who end up dying just because, one of King Lizard's men is just too much for them. And the way they die was absolutely brutal, and I think it was one of the most brutal deaths of the show so far. But the one that I actually think is even higher than that is the fake Ant-Man girl, where she ends up going inside the guy's mouth, and she tries to, grow herself to, fullest potential to, blow him up pretty much like in The Boys and, those Thanos memes. But the guy literally ends up swallowing her whole, like he just ate the best dinner of his life. And that leaves Rex to fight for himself, and he ends up beating 2 of King Lizard's men, which I personally thought that, he was going to get away free. But it turns out that King Lizard was just watching this entire time. But once the episode ends, we actually end up getting a quick post-credit scene, and it turns out that Alan is still alive, and it turns out that Thaddeus pretty much shut off his power at the end of episode 4, simply because he wanted to see how big he could grow. Which was a very big risk, by the way, because if it didn't work out, he'd be dead. But the upside was too high for him not to take the risk, and now he's strong enough to fight Viltrumites. But the one thing Thaddeus wants Alan to do is to go to Earth to get Mark, because he thinks that Mark is the key to ending this entire war. Alright, so Invincible Season 2 Episode 5 does not let its foot off the gas, and this episode is definitely one of the season's best. And I can't wait to watch Episode 6 next week.